Good morning, Year 4. Welcome to your maths lesson for Thursday, the 4th of February. So our warm-up today is going to be rounding numbers. So remember, to round to the nearest 10, you would underline the tens, and that will tell you if it's going back, in this case, to 0 or up to 10. And then the next number, the number next to it is the one that you would draw the arrow above, would tell you whether you're going to 5 or more, let it soar, or 4 or less, let it rest. So whether you're going up or down. So can you pause the video here, please, and have a go at rounding these three numbers? Okay, so here's the answers. So you can pause here and have a little look through. Make sure you've got those correct. I'm not going to go through them all now because that's a whole other lesson in itself. And then let's move on to our counting in tenths. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to use a ruler to draw a little counting stick in your book with 10 equal squares, equal parts. And then I'd like you to label each part of the counting stick and see if you can count forward and backwards along the counting stick. So for example, it'd be 1/10, 2/10, like that. Okay, so the steps to success here. The whole is cut into 10 equal pieces. So 10 is the denominator on the bottom, and goes on the bottom of the fraction, and the number of pieces, which is the numerator, goes on the top. So pause here and have a go. Okay, so you should have got something like that on your in your book. So let's count in tenths and see what comes next. So we've got 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, 10/10, and going backwards. 10/10, 9/10, 8/10, 7/10. So it's just quite straightforward, up and down. If I start at 4/10, what will be next? 5/10. You're all shouting at me. Good, good. What happens then when we get to 10/10? What else might we be able to say there, do you think? 10/10. What else might we say instead of saying 10/10? So think of it as a chocolate bar, and I've chopped it up into 10 equal pieces, and I've eaten 10 of them. What else might you say? You wouldn't say I'd eaten 10/10 necessarily. You might say I'd eaten maybe one whole. Okay, or the whole. One whole is the same as 10/10. That's all of them, isn't it? So moving on. I'd like you to have a little look, continue the pattern in the table for me, and then have a think about the questions that come and here next to it, and we'll have a go at those in a second. Okay, so if we on to the next page, I've put our counting stick back up here to help us. So here you would have 2/10 and then 2/10, 3/10, 3/10, and so on and so forth. And then what comes between 4/10 and 6/10? Well, you probably don't need the number line to tell you that it is 5/10. And then here, what's one more than 10/10? So here I've shown it as one whole. Okay, what's one more than that? You may have said, well, it's 11/10. And you would have been absolutely right. It is 11/10. Because we're still counting in tens, we're not changing what we're counting in. But you may have said something a bit different. You might have said, well, actually, it's one whole one you've got there. Make that one a little bit bigger, actually. So right, it's one whole one, and then another 10th. Okay, one and one more 10th. Okay, and if you put either of those answers, then you are correct. All right, so they both mean the same. They're both the same. They're equivalent fractions. This one is called an improper fraction because it's got a bigger number on the top than it's got on the bottom. So that's called an improper fraction. And this one is called a mixed number fraction. Okay, and there's uses for both of these. This one's more sort of easier to understand, but this one's really useful when we're trying to find equivalent fractions and things like that. So they're both correct, and one's not really better than the other. So if you put either of those, that's fine. Then if I start at 8/10, so here we are on 8/10, and count back 4/10, where will I stop? 1, 2, 3, 4. I will land on 4 tenths because 8 take away 4 is 4. Okay, so moving on. Next, I'd like to complete the sequences. So you can draw, you don't need to draw the squares, but to write it out in your book. I don't mind if you use words or fractions, the fraction symbols to fill in the gaps, do whichever you prefer. Off you go, pause here. Okay, and I'll just share the answers with you there. Don't need to go through them all, you can pause it and look yourself. What I will draw your attention to is down here. I've got 10 tens or 1 whole. Okay, doesn't matter which you put for that, they both mean the same thing. And then the next one, it's just like we said on the previous page, you can either have 11 tenths as a improper fraction, or you can have 1 whole and 1 tenth as a mixed number fraction, and both of those are correct. So pause here and check that you've got those right. Okay, moving on. Teddy is counting in tenths: 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, 10 tenths, 1 11th, 2 11ths, 3 11ths. Can you spot his mistake? So pause here and see if you can write down what you think his mistake is. Okay, let's have a little look at the answer. So the answer is Teddy thinks that after 10 tenths, you start counting in 11ths. He doesn't realise that 10 tenths is the whole. So the next number in the sequence after 10 tenths is 11 tenths, or 1 and 1 tenth. So, but we don't change the counting in wholes. So if we go back to our previous page here, we're still counting in tenths, aren't we, after we go past 1? Even if we do it as a mixed number, we're still talking about tenths. We can't suddenly change and start talking about 11ths. So that's the mistake that he's made. He doesn't realise that you need to keep the denominator the same. Next one. I'm going to be dizzy. I'm moving myself all the way around the board today. So have a look at these statements, true or false. 5 tenths is 2 tenths smaller than 7 tenths. 5 tenths is 2 tenths larger than 3 tenths. Do you agree? Explain why. Pause here and have a look. Okay, I'm hoping that you said that you did agree, because this is correct. You could have shown it using pictures, or you could have just explained it in words. If we have a look, 5 tenths is 2 tenths smaller than 7 tenths. So there's 5 tenths. And if we go up 1, 2, then we get to 7 tenths. So it is 2 smaller, isn't it? It's 2 jumps smaller than 7 tenths. And then 5 tenths is 2 tenths larger than 3 tenths. Well, yes, because if we go back 2, then we get to 3 tenths. So that's why we agree, because we've counted it on a number line. We may have drawn a picture to model that one. Okay, so for your activities today, there's only actually a silver and a gold. There's not a platinum today, as it's not that tricky. And so for silver, we just need to fill in the tenths on the number lines. Okay, if you want to go a bit further, then you can. But you don't need to draw snakes, just write them out in your book. So you can pause here and have a go at that one. And for this one, for gold, it's just drawing shapes. So with sort of 10 frames probably is easiest, squares, and then shading the following fractions. And then have a go down here. Can you draw a diagram to represent 12 tenths or 1 whole and 2 tenths? Okay, let's have a little try at that as well. Okay, and then that's all of your work done for today. And I will see you tomorrow, and tomorrow's Friday. So we all love a Friday, don't we? So I'll see you tomorrow for some more fractions work. Have a lovely rest of the day.